evening. Thank you for tuning in to the Cook County Bar Association live on CAN TV. My name is Ashley Starks, and I will be your host for tonight. And here I have with me the wonderful Michael Flanagan, an attorney here in Chicago. Tonight we're going to be discussing personal injury. If you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to call the number at the bottom of the screen. That's 312-738-1060. You can also go online at our website, which is www.cookcountybar.org. As you may or may not know, the Cook County Bar Association is the oldest association for African American judges and lawyers. We take this time every week on Wednesday at 6 p.m. to bring you special guests to discuss legal topics and to provide you with legal information. Although we are attorneys, we do not represent your legal interests. If you have any questions or you need legal assistance, please call the number at the bottom of the screen. Again, that number is 312-738-1060. Select option 1 for our lawyer referral program, and someone will refer you to an attorney who can help you. You can also get referred a lawyer by going on our website, again, at thecookcountybar.org. Before we begin our discussion, we must inform you that the opinions and views expressed on this show do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Cook County Bar Association, its board members, its officers, or sponsors. So with that being said, let's dive right in. Michael, so could you tell us, what is personal injury and what does a personal injury attorney do? I know for me, a lot of times when I think of personal injury, I think of the Aaron Brockovich cases that deal with toxic torts and ground contamination, or the McDonald's case that deals with the woman who sustained third-degree burns from a hot coffee. So if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, give us an idea of what that is.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me, Ashley, and happy Black History Month to you.
Happy Black History Month.
So personal injury runs the gamut of a lot of different types of legal issues. Typically, the most popular types of personal injuries, or the most common rather, are car accidents. That's your standard fender bender, could be a rear end accident, could be a T-bone accident. From there, personal injury kind of encompasses a lot of different areas. Workers' compensation, for one, right? You get injured on the job as a result of a duty that you were performing that was a job duty that caused an injury. Also, aviation accidents, bicycling accidents, dog bites. There are a number of different types of injuries that could occur all under the umbrella of personal injury. Further, some of the more popular cases that you might have heard of, such as the McDonald's coffee spill. Definitely McDonald's was found to be negligent there. And then, of course, actually civil rights cases too, police shootings sort of encompass personal injury as well. So pretty much if you're injured as a result of the negligence of someone else, then you might have a personal injury case.
Is there typically an overlap with different areas of the law when dealing with personal injury? Like you just mentioned civil rights, you sometimes deal with those types of issues. Do you notice that there's typically, sometimes there's an overlap, or is it usually just personal injury and civil rights?
Well, again, personal injury is a very broad term for a lot of different things when somebody's injured. But sometimes personal injury does overlap to other areas. For instance, nursing home negligence is an area where not only is there a personal injury involved, but there's some violations of state laws in relation to elderly people, and also wrongful death when a person dies at the hands of another. That could kind of have some carryover. For instance, a DUI accident could be where the individual who was driving caused the death of another person in a vehicular homicide. So there you have both criminal activity as well as a personal injury.
So when would you say that someone should seek the advice of a personal injury attorney?
All the time. The great thing about seeking the advice of a personal injury attorney is typically it's free, right? Typically, personal injury attorneys do free consultations at no cost because we want to find out what exactly is going on before we decide to take the case on. So it doesn't cost you anything. You see a lot of different advertisements, whether that be on the TV or billboard. So I always suggest that if you feel like you've been a victim of someone else's negligence, whether it be at the job, whether it be some sort of nursing home abuse, even a car accident, sometimes you just never know what actually reaching out to an attorney could do for your case. So I definitely suggest to do that all the time.
Well, speaking of car accidents, let's kind of segue a little bit into car accidents. So if someone did get into a car accident, what are some of the things that, because they're so common, especially with all the traffic in Chicago, what's some of the advice that you would give to someone who just got into a car accident? Should they seek counsel right away? Should they try to figure things out on their own? What do you suggest?
Well, I would certainly suggest once the accident happens, you want to memorialize it. As I typically tell all of my clients, documentation beats conversation, right? So
Absolutely.
we want to document exactly what happened because what we don't want is a dispute between two people, what we typically call he say, she say. So documentation starts with getting the police report. Right, so a lot of times you might feel like, oh, I don't have time to wait for the police. I just want to just go ahead and get my car fixed, or somebody rear-ends you and you feel like your car is drivable so you can drive it home. Well, actually, you should stay there and call the police and wait for the police to get there. And it might take the police 15 or 20 minutes, but it'll be well worth your time, right? Because now your attorney has an on-the-scene police report written by an officer that can get both sides of the story from both parties, and that helps a lot when it comes to negotiating settlements with insurance companies. I would say the second thing that people sometimes forget to do or neglect to do is seek immediate medical attention. Get to the hospital immediately if you can. If you need to be taken by EMT or ambulance, I would say definitely do that, because you just don't know what's wrong, and it's always best to get checked out by a licensed physician first before doing anything else, frankly. So after getting that police report, I suggest going to the hospital. So some other things, obviously, what you say to the police can and will be used against you. So you never want to tell the police that you feel like you were at fault, right? Because there might be cameras there. There might be witnesses. So you just never want to give the police any information unless you truly are at fault and you just want to be a nice person. But I've seen sometimes when my client wasn't actually at fault, but the police has some conflicting information based upon a statement. So just be very careful what you say, not only to the police, but also to insurance companies, right? And that's probably the fourth thing, is the opposing parties or the liable parties insurance company will often contact people and try to get something on paper to nail that person down and kind of trap them into a statement. People say things such as, oh, I wasn't injured that bad, or it was somebody else's fault, or I was texting while driving, and all of those things can come up down the line and really bite you in a place where it doesn't feel good to be bitten. So I would certainly say when you get into an accident, you should kind of follow protocol.
All right. So for those of you who are just now tuning in, this is the Cook County Bar Association live hotline show, and we are taking open calls from the community about all things legal. I'm your host, Attorney Ashley Starks, and I am here with Attorney Michael Flanagan, and we are discussing personal injury. Please call in and join our discussion with the number at the bottom of the screen. That's 312-738-1060. So I want to ask you another question, just kind of moving away from that a little bit, but you did say that you meet with clients potential clients at least, for their initial consultation, which is pretty common with attorneys. But I know that personal injury attorneys are a little unique in that they work on a contingency fee basis for the most part, not speaking for all attorneys, but they do. So if you could just explain what a contingency fee is, and then how you work on a contingency fee basis.
Well, that's a great question, Ashley. So personal injury lawyers are the gatekeepers to the courthouse. They allow your average person who might have been injured, who can't afford an attorney, to be able to hire an attorney on what's called a contingency fee basis, meaning that we don't get paid unless you get paid. And that allows everyone, no matter how much money they have or what walk of life they come from, to be able to have access to our great court system here in America. So typically, the contingency fee is normally anywhere from 30 to 40%, and the personal injury attorney, such as myself, will front all of the cost for your case. And then upon settlement of your claim or upon garnering a judgment in trial, we would take a percentage, typically 30 or 40% off the back end. And some people wonder, well, wow, if I go out and hire an attorney, is that going to greatly reduce the amount of money that I actually put in my pocket? And the answer is no. Typically, insurance companies will lowball you because they know that you're not represented and that you're not familiar with the law. And even if some people are familiar with the law, but definitely hiring an attorney gives the insurance companies a little bit more of a pushback per se, to say, hey, you know what, we can file a lawsuit if we need to, you know. So I would say that's how the contingency fee works. No money down, no cost up front to the client. You bring us your case, we get paid off the back end. And that, typically a lot of clients like that because it gives them a little leeway to move on with their lives without having to try to afford expensive legal fees.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you mentioned just now about dealings with insurance companies. So if you could just elaborate a little bit more on your relationship with insurance companies when dealing with, you know, these personal injury cases.
Well, so the attorney is the liaison between the client and the insurance company. So a lot of times we negotiate with the at-fault insurer to try to get you the best settlement that you can. And, you know, unfortunately, adjusters are attorneys without licenses, so they try to poke holes in your case, and that's part of the reason why, you know, if something does happen, if you are injured, it behooves you to contact a good personal injury attorney who not only has experience, but that really cares about your case, who really cares about you, who's really patient, because you might have a lot of questions. A lot of people have never been in accidents before and really don't plan to be in accidents, so you know, you want somebody who you can kind of identify with and who'll fight for you and be patient and just won't look at you as another number. But going back to your question of our relationship with the insurance companies, we advocate on your behalf. So, for instance, hypothetically, if you have $3,000 in medical bills, and the insurance company might only offer you, you know, $5,000 to settle your claims, and you wonder, well, you know, that's not enough. What about pain and suffering? What about loss of normal life? All these things that I couldn't do, running back and forth to physical therapy. I need to be compensated for that. And so the importance of hiring an attorney is we can get on the phone with them and say, hey, you know, our client deserves, you know, $10,000 or $15,000 or $25,000, just based upon your medical bills and the extent of your injuries, etc. So our relationship with their insurer is to really explain to them how this injury affected your life, the extent of the injury, and why you should be fully compensated for it.
So do you ever run into any, like, what are some of the issues that you run into when dealing with insurance companies? Like, I know that some insurance companies might have a cap on how much they could actually give someone. So, like, what are some of the other ones that, if you could think of any off the top of your head, that you may face or you may encounter that are pretty common?
Well, I can think of plenty off the top of my head. So no insurance is the main one, right? Unfortunately, you know, there are people out here that are driving without any insurance. And so if you are, you know, in a collision with somebody with no insurance, people wonder, like, well, what's going to happen? You know, this person didn't have insurance. Well, hopefully you had insurance, because your insurance will have to step up to the plate and cover any sort of personal injury and property damage that you might have sustained as a result of the other person's negligence. So it's important that you always maintain insurance, because you just don't know. Some people get into really bad collisions with people who don't have insurance. But if you have insurance, then you're able to collect something versus nothing. So it's extremely important to always pay your insurance bill on a monthly basis. We have people and clients who come to us all the time who let their insurance lapse for one day or a few hours, and they were going to pay it the next day, but they wanted to pay their car note and go out and party first or something else. But unfortunately, that same day they were involved in an auto collision, and the other person didn't have insurance, and their whole lives were changed and because of that. So that's one issue that we commonly run into. Another issue is short insurance, or so for instance, what we typically refer to as short insurance is somebody with only a $25,000 policy. Well, if you have $50,000 or $75,000 worth of injuries, but the other person only has a $25,000 policy, then that's an issue. That's what's called a coverage issue. So typically, we advise people to, make sure that you take out enough insurance. Try to at least get $50,000 of insurance per person per accident. I myself and most people have $100,000 worth of liability insurance. So if something does happen and they're liable, at least that other person's bills can be covered, and there's enough room typically to compensate them. So those are some of the more typical issues that we have that we get phone calls about every day. Is no insurance, or this person didn't have enough insurance. And lastly, Ashley, making sure that the people who drive your car are actually named on your insurance policy. A lot of folks have kids and they just say, hey, I want to run down the street, and next thing you know, they get into a collision and they're not even covered under the policy because they're not an authorized driver. Well, insurance companies will look for so many different reasons to deny you coverage or to deny the other party coverage because of some glitch in the paperwork or some sort of oversight. So it's always important to make sure that the people who are driving your car are actually covered under your policy.
Good advice. So just to kind of move away from that a little bit, is there a particular area that you see that's on the rise in personal injury generally?
Generally, I would say Uber and Lyft accidents have become more prevalent. Of course, a lot more people are ride sharing. And so with that, people are doing all sorts of things. Unfortunately, while they're driving Uber and Lyft, they might be texting, they might be eating, etc. And particularly in Chicago, right now, as you know, it's snowing outside and it's really slippery. So in the wintertime, you just never know what might happen. And so you kind of entrust, your ride share driver to make sure that you get somewhere safely. And sometimes, you might be in a collision. So definitely Uber and Lyft collisions are on the rise. They are. They really are.
And these are the passengers of the Uber of the shared drive, the shared ride?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the passengers. And unfortunately, Uber and Lyft only have excess policies, which means that they will only cover your personal injuries after your own insurance policy covers your personal injuries. So if you're a passenger and you have a vehicle, well, they'll expect your insurance company's policy to cover you, even though you weren't driving your own vehicle. So if you have State Farm and your vehicle's at home and you decide to hop in an Uber, well, if that Uber gets into an accident, then they'll expect your State Farm policy to cover you. And once that State Farm policy is maxed out, then Uber and Lyft will come in with what's called an excess policy. So again, it's very important to maintain your own insurance because you never know when you might need your own insurance. A lot of people don't know that if you own a car and you're walking down the street and another car hits you, your insurance company just might cover you. Even though you weren't driving your car, your driver's policy sometimes covers you even if you're just walking down the street. So you always want to have proper insurance on yourself, particularly with a reputable company. That's another thing we see, Ashley, is, subprime insurance companies. Unfortunately, just because you pay a lesser rate doesn't mean that you're going to get the same quality service that you might get from one of the top 5 or 10 insurance companies. So I would say definitely look at insurance as an investment. Everybody can't afford the best insurance, but certainly try to get the best that you can, because some of the subprime insurers, and I won't name any, but some of the subprime insurers will always look for reasons to deny your claim.
Okay. So for those of you who are just now joining us, I want to say that you are now watching the Cook County Bar Association. I am attorney Ashley Starks, who's hosting this show, and I am here with attorney Michael Flanagan. We are discussing personal injury. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to call us at the bottom of the screen. That's 312-738-1060. And so, I guess just to pick up on our conversation a little bit. So what got you initially interested in personal injury law?
That's an interesting question. Everybody thinks that they kind of have the gift of gab, per se, when you're a little kid and you're arguing with your parents and your mom says, you should be a lawyer because you love to argue. Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, personal injury lawyers, we do a lot of arguing. We argue with insurance companies. We argue with opposing counsel. Once we go to trial, is it
like what we see on TV? Like a civil action, or?
You know what? It sort of is. And I think that the most effective form of argument is evidence, right? So again, documentation beats conversation. So going back to your question of what made me want to become a PI attorney, I feel like I had all of the skills that it took to really become a good personal injury attorney. You have to be empathetic. You have to actually care about people. You have to be a good communicator, both written and verbally. And you gotta be a hustler. You really got to be able to juggle a lot of different things. You got to get the medical records and the hospital bills, and there are a lot of different things that a personal injury attorney has to do. In addition to being a good business person, in addition to being a good litigator and trial lawyer. So when I surveyed the landscape and looked at some of the more prominent attorneys across the country, particularly some of the African American attorneys that were really doing well across the country, the Johnny Cochrans of the world. Even Thurgood Marshall was a civil attorney for a long time. So that kind of gave me the motivation and a frame of reference to say, you know what, I can do this too.
Yeah, for sure. I know you mentioned being in court. Would you say that most of your cases, do they settle, or are you going to trial for a lot of them, or does it just depend?
That just depends. Some of the more prominent cases where the injuries are really, really bad, you'll find yourself in court because you have to file a lawsuit in order to give full value for those cases. Insurance companies, typically, sometimes they won't give you as much money as you should on catastrophic injuries. Some of the other cases tend to settle for lesser dollar amounts. So it really just depends. It depends on the insurance company, it depends on the lawyer, it depends on the client.
Okay, very cool. So what do you enjoy most about being a personal injury attorney?
I would say there's never a dull moment. There are always people contacting you and calling you, and there's just so much to do every single day. It's really fast-paced. So that's what I really like.
All right, we're at the conclusion of our show. I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in today, and I also want to thank our lovely guest, Mr. Attorney Michael Flanagan, and for providing your useful information. We hope that was useful to you all, and thank you to our phone tech as well. Please be sure to join us next week. We have guest attorney Patrick John, who will be discussing judicial ethics of the Cook County Bar from the candidate's perspective. So feel free to call in and join in that conversation. Michael Flanagan and I will also have another segment on March 26th where we'll be picking up on a segment 2 of personal injuries. So call in with your questions if you have any then as well. Thank you and have a good night.
Good night.